third, fourth, fifth grade, junior high, you guys are dismissed. You can head back to your classes. As you were coming in, you received one of these. We call them our bulletins, sermon guides, whatever you want to call them. That's fine. Everybody, if you have one of these, if you have one of these, I want you to take it. I want you to hold it up so I can see it. I want you to flip it over and look at the back. At the bottom, you'll notice something new. It was here last week. I failed to show it to you. It's something that we call a push. Pray until something happens. And each day of the week, we're asking you to be praying with us for some holes that we have in our leadership team. You look around, if you've been here for longer than 12 or 13 months, like we keep getting bigger. More people keep showing up, which is kind of a cool thing. But here's the reality. It's not a guilt trip. It's just a reality that we have the same leadership structure and style as when we had 140 people versus the 260 or 70 that we have now. And so we have some very significant and specific holes that we need filled. And first, as we look at these just really quickly, first, I need to apologize to you as your lead pastor. In an effort to protect you, I haven't shared these like I should, but I'm going to share them with you now. So if you look on Monday, we're going to ask everybody to be praying for an adult ministries leader. That's someone to help oversee men and women's ministry and life groups and help guide and direct them through the discipleship process that we want to see every person in our church in. On Tuesday, we're going to ask that somebody, that we all be praying for an outreach leader. That's someone to oversee all of the events that we do in the community. Wednesday, youth group leader, someone to come alongside and start leading the youth group that meets during the week. On Thursday, we're praying for a women's ministry leader. That's a hole that we have right now. And then on Friday, we're praying for a Grace Kids coordinator and teachers. So we have several people on staff that are filling all of these holes. Just for example, in this, and I'm just the reality. I'm filling hole on Monday. I'm filling that. Tuesday, I'm filling that role. On Wednesday, Heather and I fill that role. There's nobody filling the role on Thursday. And on Friday, Diana is filling the Grace Kids coordinator. And then we have a bunch of people that are teaching all over the place. And so we need you to pray that God would begin to raise up the people that are going to take over those ministries. And by no mistake, because I believe God ordains everything, I think that what we're going to look at today when we read Exodus chapter 4 might identify with this idea of praying about whether God would have you step into a leadership role. And maybe you look at this list and you're like, hey, I want to do something, but I don't see it on this list. How do I connect with that? Man, hey, I'm so glad you asked that question. Right back there at that, everybody look back over there. See that big thing that says connect? That's where you go if you want to connect. So Exodus chapter 4, if you have a Bible, you can follow along. We're not going to read it just yet, but we're going to keep a verse from Exodus 3 and a couple of most of Exodus 4, and we're going to be looking at the 4 objections that Moses gives to God's call in his life, and I think that we might all identify with these 4 objections. You know, one of my favorite things as summer is rapidly approaching, one of my favorite things to do at summer camp. Have you ever been to a summer camp? So half of us are cool, half of us not. One of my favorite things to do at summer camp, actually one of my favorite things to watch at summer camp is the tug of war. Anybody ever been in a good game of tug of war? They do this at Young Life Properties, and they do this at youth camps, and inevitably there's a big mud pit about the size of the center circle here on the gym floor. And you get cabins together, and they start playing tug of war, right? You get your biggest, strongest guy, which is usually me on the team, and you put him at the anchor. Really? Nobody? You're not going to laugh at that? I mean, no, but you get your biggest, strongest guy, and you put him at the anchor, and you get the other guys, and if you're smart, you alternate on the side of the rope, and you don't just pull like you tug like that, right? You don't just do one steady pull. So, and you do this in the purpose of the game, and it's a lot of fun when you play tug of war, is to take the other team and pull them so the first person falls into the mud pit. And inevitably what happens when that first person goes, what happens? Everybody goes, and it's a beautiful, wonderful, glorious thing. And tug of war is an incredibly fun game, unless you're the rope. The rope doesn't have fun in tug of war. It's being yanked by 2 opposite forces, trying to pull it apart. Tug of war is fun for everybody but the rope. And part of what happens and part of the problem is we live in this life. All of us right now are in this tug of war where we're the rope, and it's a battle between the flesh, me, and the spirit, the one that follows Jesus and lives inside of me and wants me to do something. But there's this constant battle. Do I do this? Do I not do this? What does it look like? In Exodus chapter 4 is if nothing but a beautiful picture of this tug of war that Moses is going through in his life, as God is calling him to something bigger and deeper than he could possibly do himself. Now, the first objection that Moses gives to God's call in his life is found in Exodus chapter 3, and they're going to put it on the screen, and we're going to read this. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" And he said, "But I will be with you, and this will be a sign for you that when you are sent, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." And so what Moses is really saying in this verse, his objection, what he's really saying is this, is he's asking this question, who am I to do this thing? That's what Moses is saying. Who am I? He's saying, well, wait a second, God, who am I to do this? Like, you're telling me I'm going to go this, but who am I? And at its core, this is a question that we all struggle with. It's easy to get stuck in this cycle of indecision. And one of the biggest dangers that we face as believers growing up, and especially if you have kids that are like 18 and under, is the world continually speaks into them this lie or this idea that you need to find yourselves or you need to discover who you are. Now, I'm not talking about like work, right? Like my kids, I've got 2 kids graduating this year. One's going off to college. One's already started his career. The one that's going off to college is trying to discover what her life is going to be like post living in mom and dad's house. Now, that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about the question, who am I? Or this struggle to find my identity or what am I going to be or how. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is at this deeper core, Moses' objection is like, it's a struggle of identity. It is really what it is. It's this struggle, this battle between who I think I am, or even worse, who I feel that I am, versus who God says that I am. And God very clearly defines each of us as followers and believers of Jesus. Before I get going too far, let me stop my notes because I almost preached the last half of the message. And I know some of you would be excited about that, but we've got 6 or 7 more points to go before we get there, okay? It's a question of internal struggle. It's this idea of who I am. It's a battle that takes place inside Moses when he says, but who am I to go to Egypt? Who am I to go to Pharaoh? Who am I to lead a Bible study? Who am I to be a Grace Kids coordinator? Who am I to lead my wife spiritually? And I don't have any background, and she's been a believer way longer than I have. Who am I to lead women's ministry or to be an adult ministries coordinator? I don't have the skills. It's an internal struggle that Moses begins with. He's looking internally as God's calling him into something bigger than what he could see, and he's saying, who am I? But he doesn't stop there. Not only does he have an internal struggle of who am I, there's also this external struggle that we see in chapter 4, and I'm going to guess that in your heart of hearts, this is something that each and every one of you struggle with at some level. Let's look at it. We have an internal struggle. Let's look at the external struggle. Exodus chapter 4, starting in verse 1, then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. And the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. I'd run from it too. I don't like snakes. They're horrible. Verse 4, But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. And so he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand again, that they may believe that I am the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has appeared to you. What Moses is really saying here when he says, behold, they will not believe me, what he's really saying is what if they? What if I step out in faith and I feel like God's, I'm just going to use, I'm just going to use the Grace Kids coordinator as an option. Oh, thank you. I'm going to use the Grace Kids coordinator as an option, as the example, okay? So this question, what it is if somebody you feel like God's stirring and you're like, hey, God's calling me to be the Grace Kids coordinator. And notice I'm looking all over the room so nobody can go, he was looking right at me when he said that. And you think that in your heart at 3 o'clock in the afternoon as you're having your afternoon tea. Again, I'm not singling anybody out. If you have tea at 3 o'clock, that's okay. I'm not necessarily talking to you. And at 6 o'clock, you're like, oh, man, what if I call Pastor Jason and tell him I think that I'm supposed to be the Grace Kids coordinator, and he just laughs at me and says, you're not qualified to be the Grace Kids coordinator. Are you crazy? Or the women's ministry director, and you're like, wait a second, like, I can't do this. Like, I'm too young, or I don't have enough experience, or I don't know enough of the Bible to lead a Bible study. I can't do this. It's that idea of what if it's making decisions or not making decisions based upon a presupposed outcome that you don't know is going to happen or not happen. Anybody ever do that? Yeah. I do it a lot. And then I make the wrong choice, and then I go back and I relive that conversation over and over and over and over again in my head. And I'm like, man, I should have said this, or I should have said that. And really what it boils down to is this idea of being static or stuck in a position and not taking a step forward because of fear of what might happen. A fear of they might laugh at me, or they may make fun of me, or they might tell me no, or I might step out and make a mistake and drop the ball. Man, I would rather you step out and in effort and drop the ball than just sit there and not doing anything. Like we talk to the team all the time. It's okay if we try something and fail. It's better than not trying anything at all. Listen, the Bible talks to us about a range of emotions that are available to us. Anger. Anybody angry this week? I've worked really hard to not be angry at people turning left in front of me. And I've actually done a really good job. I just started praying for him. Jacob got prayed for last night. I'm just kidding, man. I got stuck behind him. Anger, joy, sorrow, hope. We can experience a whole range of emotions that are available to us as humankind. Created by God for us to experience a gamut of emotions. And they're all good in their own way, even sorrow. Because without sorrow, how do you know what joy is? Pain is a beautiful thing, because without pain, like if you have a blister or a splinter in your foot and your body doesn't give you pain to tell you that something's wrong, you can keep working and working, and it creates a worse situation in your foot. That's what leprosy is. That's why it was such a big deal in the Old Testament. But the Bible tells us very specifically in Scripture that there's one emotion that we should never live in. We should never pitch our tent and camp out in this emotion. Does anybody know what it is? It's fear and anxiety. Don't be anxious for anything. For God did not give you a spirit of fear, but of power and sound mind. You, as a follower of Jesus, everybody look at me. You, as a follower of Jesus, do not have to live in the fear and the anxiety of the unknown. Because we have a God that is already there waiting for you. So this objection to God's call in your life, this what if they, really isn't an objection. It's you choosing to live in an emotion that you're commanded not to live in. If you live, now listen, hear what I'm saying. Don't trust me. I know that anxiety and fear and all of that is something, trust me. I'll be abundantly honest and open with you. I told the team, man, on most Sundays, there's like a 75% chance that I'm like, I can't go up and start this thing. Like I'm overwhelmed. And sometimes I'm back in the hallway and people are praying over me. And sometimes I get up here and I freeze and I can't get a word out. So anxiety and fear and depression, all of those are all very real things. I'm not saying that they're not. What I am saying is that you don't have to live in the fear of the uncertainty of the unknown because you have a God that is already there waiting for you. There's a difference between having a moment of fear or anxiety and living in it continually. You don't have to do that. So we have this internal objection. Who am I? We have this external objection. What if they? Well, in verse 10, Moses goes back to himself and he begins to point out his lack of qualifications to God. Look at verse 10 with me. But Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue." Like this could be like my theme verse for my life, because I get up here and I just jumble it up sometimes, y'all, and you work with me through it, and you're gracious in that. But Moses begins to point out his lack of qualifications, and really the objection here is he's saying this: I have never. So you have this, who am I? You have this, what if they? And then you have this objection, I have never. And listen to me, this might be the worst of all of them. How can we ever, if we don't try the first time? Except for spinach, that's awful. You should never try it the first time. Every parent's like, oh, why did he say that out loud? Listen, God's answer to your lack of abilities is to send somebody. He sent Aaron to Moses. He does it all through Scripture. Over and over and over and over again, he sends people to help you in your weakness. Remember, we talked about this last week. The results are up to him. Your part is obedience. He's responsible for the outcome. You're just required to be obedient. Here's another little quotey one. You could throw this down if you want. God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Now, listen, I am the number one prime example of this. You know what I did before this? I sold googly eyes and glitter. I was a store manager at Michael's Arts and Crafts. That's what I did. I have zero I have training, the last 8 years, but I didn't go to seminary. I don't have a degree. I don't have any of that stuff. I got a bunch of guys that have poured into my life. And then at the option of beginning to figure out sermon series and all of it, God's been bringing people around me in this church that help do research for our messages. I have somebody that I meet with on Mondays or Tuesdays. I can't remember what day it is. And we review the message and he gives feedback. And I'm always trying to better what I do here, because I want to honor God in it. But if you were here for my first sermon, it was bad. Where's John Dornable? It was bad. RC teaching, Marianne was there. It was bad, wasn't it? It was not good. I'm barely passable now as it is, but I'm better than I was then. Okay? Here's another example for you of someone that was called before he was equipped, and that's the Apostle Paul. So he's on the road. We all know his conversion story, right? If you grew up in church Sunday school, you know his conversion story, right? He's riding to go persecute the church, and the skies open up, and light shines down, and he sees the Son of Man standing at the right hand of the Father, and Jesus says to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And then he's blinded, and it says that he goes to Damascus. They lay hands on They pray for him. The scales fall from his eyes. He's converted. And then it says in Acts chapter 9 that he begins to preach in Damascus. And all it means is he just begins to tell people what happened. Do you know what he did after that? He didn't write like Ephesians or Galatians or Romans or 1st and 2nd Timothy or Philemon or any of those things. You know what he did? He went for 3 years to the Arabian desert and began to study and begin to be taught the Torah in light of Christ. He was called to be an apostle to the nations before he was ever equipped. He steps into it. He begins to be taught for 3 years, and then he returns to Damascus. He's persecuted, and then he goes to Jerusalem, and he meets the apostles for the first time, and then he steps out and begins to become the greatest evangelist the world has ever known. The author of, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, of the majority of your New Testament. Now imagine if Jesus is like, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? I imagine the voice sounds better than that. And he goes, scales fall off. He goes and gets trained. He's 3 years of training. And Jesus says it's time to go, and Paul goes. I've never written a book before. Like, you want me to write a book? Like, what does this mean? I can't write a book. I've never written a book before. I can't do this. Or I can't preach it. You want me to preach an evangelistic message? Like, you want me to like, I've never done that before. Imagine where we would be now if Paul had said, I've never. I don't know. I think it's something worth thinking about. And finally, we see the fourth objection to Moses to God's calling. He just tells God to use somebody else. He basically just says, no, I don't want to do it. Just use somebody else. It's in verse 13 of Exodus 4. He says this, but he said, oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Now, this is an important one that you should probably note in verse 14. It says, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Man, 1 objection, 2 objection, 3 objection, 4, and then God got mad. He says, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to say. He shall speak to you he shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hands this staff, which you shall do all these signs. This use someone else is just abject rejection of God's call in your life. Plain and simple. It is at its core, at its heart, at its most base, it is simple rebellion and sin against God. If God is calling you to do something and you tell him no, make no mistake about it, there's no ifs, ands, or buts, you are in rebellion against God. And God don't like rebellion. And it's not scare tactics. Listen, I'm not like dooming and glooming you up here. It's just reality. God doesn't like rebellion. Moses, here's the problem. Moses was comfortable in the desert. Moses had his place in the desert. He was there, and he had purpose in the desert. He had a job. He was a sheep herder, and he had a wife and a family. But God had a call that was bigger than Moses could see. And ultimately what it comes down to is this idea that it's all about the promise of what can be versus leaving the comfort of what is. God is calling each and every one of you. I don't care how old you are, Clara, God is calling you to something bigger than you could imagine. In stepping into that thing is leaving the comfort of this for the promise of what God says he has for you. Sometimes God will reveal that promise to you. He might show you the whole thing. Most times he doesn't, because the whole thing would overwhelm us, and he gives us just enough light for the next step. Anybody ever feel that way? You're like, God, will you show me what to do? And he's like, black out the lights. Turn everything out. That's my team. You're like, God, would you show me what to do? Like, Lord, I need your help. And he goes, yeah, I'll show you what to do. Go right there. And I'm going, but I want to go down there. But I can't see down there. But here's the beautiful thing about stepping in obedience to what God has for you. Watch this. Everybody, can you see this? You get the idea? You see the light? Look what happens when I step to where God tells me to step. What happens? The next step is illuminated. That's pretty cool, isn't it? You can turn on the lights. I made that up right there on the spot. That was pretty amazing. It's all about the promise of what can be versus the pain of leaving what is. We're comfortable in the desert, but God says, I've got more than the desert. I've got more for you than the desert. So here's the thing that you have to understand. The Creator gets to define the creation. God gets to define who you are. You don't get to define who you are. God defines who you are. He gets to tell you. He gets to call you. The result of your life is up to Him. Your job is obedience. Don't miss it. Don't miss the greater life because you're unwilling to step into the promise that God has for you because you're scared of what might happen. Moses was content with the desert, but God wanted to make a difference, wanted to use him to make a difference. And like Moses, your destiny is to make a difference. I don't think this will be on your screen because I just added it this morning. Proverbs 16 says this, all the ways of man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. Listen, God has made everything for a purpose. You are made on purpose, for a purpose. Your destiny is to make a difference. It'll all look different. You may not be called to stand up here and preach, but I guarantee you, you're called to preach to people in your life, either with your words or by the way that you live. Moms and dads, you're called to make a difference in your kids' lives. Grandparents, you're called to make a difference in the lives of your grandkids. If you're sitting in this room and your heart is beating and you have breath in your lung, you guys are all called to make a difference in the lives of those ones sitting on the front row. When we do baby dedications, right? We dedicate a baby and we ask mom and dad, hey, are you going to raise this baby to follow the Lord? And say, yeah, and we have a congregation. Are you going to help do the same thing? And as a congregation, we promise that we will. Your destiny is to make a difference. It's not to live a ho-hum life, to just get what you want out of it. God has more for you than what you could even imagine. We keep reading in Proverbs 16. Everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. By steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord one turns away from evil. Listen to verse 7. When a man's way pleases the Lord, he makes even his enemies be at peace with him. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. Verse 9. And you might pray this over your life. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Your destiny is to make a difference, but I want you to understand this as the worship team comes. Your destiny is not about you. Your destiny is about God. Your destiny is not about you. It's not about what you want. It's not about how you feel. God's more concerned with your holiness than your comfort. He's more concerned that you're holy than comfortable. Did you catch that? That's uncomfortable. I don't like that. I want to be comfortable. But God says, I don't care. I'm more concerned with your holiness and righteousness than your comfort. That doesn't mean it's all going to be doom and gloom, but it may mean that you go through periods of struggle, and that's okay. Because we have a God that's already waiting at the end of them for us. Don't miss that for your life. Like, right, we give our hearts to Jesus and we're like, God, I want you to be the king of my life. Lord, I want you to save me from my sins. But then we have this tug of war in our lives where, like, I want to go do what I want to do. And God's saying, just give me your life. Just give it to me all. Like, just give it to me and watch what I can do with it. And so as we stand, I want to invite you to stand and sing. I think we have 2 songs. I want you to think about what God is asking you to give to him and how you can step out in obedience.